She fixed an elderly woman's car for free and was fired on the spot. What happened next will shock you. The sun pressed down on the asphalt like a thumb. Heat shimmered over the shop roof, and the smell of oil and hot metal hung in the air. A battered Cadillac coughed its way into Henderson's auto in the middle of the afternoon, radiator steam painting thin fingers across the windshield. Maya Jackson wiped her hands on her coveralls, the grease under her nails still sticky from her last job, and crouched beside the engine as if meeting an old friend. She listened. Engine spoke to her in a language she'd learned standing on a stool beside her father, Marcus, while he showed her which nuts to tighten, and which problems deserved patience rather than quick fixes. The woman who stepped out of the Cadillac moved with a cane and a careful dignity. Her hair was silver and pulled into a tidy bun. Wrinkles around her eyes told stories of laughter as much as of time. She smiled at Maya the way someone smiles at a kind stranger, with relief. "It's been making this awful sound," she said. "I don't know much about cars." Maya didn't look up from the engine. She had trained herself to let the work speak first. She found the problem in 5 minutes. A worn belt, misaligned pulleys, a cracked hose. It was the sort of fix that could keep a car from stalling out on a lonely stretch of highway. She tightened, replaced, adjusted. The Cadillac rolled over with a smooth V8 purr and a confidence it had not felt in years. The elderly woman reached into her purse and offered a bill the way people hand over gratitude. Human, earnest. Maya shook her head. "It was nothing, ma'am," she said. The words were quiet. They carried Marcus's voice. They carried a kind of stubbornness that had been handed down to her. Help because help was right, not because you expected the world in return. But someone had been listening. Mr. Henderson came out of the office like a thunderhead. His face was red around the ears. He barked, sharp, public, humiliating. "You took money and didn't register it." He had a list of imagined rules and a fury that chose a child as its outlet. In front of the bay and the customers waiting, he said the words that would shift everything. "You're fired." Not in a private conversation, not even a quiet word. He said it loud, with the shop's mechanics around like jury members, eyes darting away or lingering with discomfort. Maya's hands were still dirty. She pressed her palms to her hips and felt every stubbornness she'd learned from Marcus, and every fear she carried for the days ahead. Henderson's shameful performance did something else. It revealed a small truth about the world she'd grown up in. A 15-year-old girl could be proficient with a torque wrench and still be dismissed because of a boss's business math and a desire to be seen as the one holding the ledger. So she, stuffing her pride down, she walked away, the smell of burnt oil following her like an accusation. If stories of justice and unexpected hope move you, consider subscribing. Maya walked home through the heat as if it were a physical weight. The sun made her vision narrow into a line of sidewalk and the hum of distant traffic. She passed strip malls and dry landscaping, the kind of cityscape where dreams either hardened into grit or warmed into gentle possibility. She held her cap in her hands and felt the cotton of it soak up sweat. The last thing she wanted was for her mother, Sarah, to know. Sarah's dialysis schedule was already a kind of family calendar. Appointments, waiting rooms, the sharp beaded rhythm of survival. Maya watched how her mother slept sometimes with her hand on the Brennan dialysis port, eyes closed tight against the ache. The money in their account did not stretch itself like elastic. It held a number that meant hospital bills and medicines, and sometimes a quiet, terrible question about whether kindness could be afforded. When Maya opened the small front door of the trailer they rented, Sarah looked up, a magazine folded on her lap, lines of fatigue softened by the sight of her daughter. "How was work?" she asked, her voice the same that had taught Maya how to hum while kneeling on grease-stained concrete. "Fine," Maya said. She put the used rags in a bin and went to the small kitchen to make ramen. Cheap, familiar, honest. At night, after dishes, she would count every penny. That evening she did that again, $42 and change in their account. That number was not a punchline. It was a ledger of worry. Marcus had died the year before, his hands steady when he worked, his laugh the kind that filled a room and left little after-images inside people who remembered him. He had taught Maya how to listen to engines and people. He had taught her that helping without expectation was not naive. It was choosing who you wanted to be. The next morning felt heavier, as if the heat had become a crown. Maya left resumes at places that would only take older workers, made hopeful calls that met polite rejections, and stood at counters where men glanced past her as if she were invisible. She felt the marginalizing press of age and gender, and found the world sometimes less interested in her talent than in the fact that she was a teenage girl who might leave for college, or might not be around long enough to learn a trade. It wasn't just about paychecks, it was about respect, and sometimes the absence of respect is a slow erosion. Nights were the worst. She lay awake and replayed Henderson's shout, the way the shop's chatter dissolved into awkward silence. She replayed Marcus's hands, rough but sure, showing her how to hold a wrench like someone who was holding a promise. "Kindness takes courage," he'd say. "You're never too small to do the right thing." Those words were a rope she grabbed at in the dark. Dates slipped by in the pattern of job applications, waiting rooms, and making do. Then, one afternoon, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with an unfamiliar number. "Jessica," said the voice on the line. Jessica, the assistant, with a voice lined with unshakable calm, asked if Maya could come to a Scottsdale address. A car would be sent. There was a way the words were offered that made disbelief taste like metal. "Is this because of the Cadillac?" Maya asked, suspicion and curiosity tied together. "Yes," Jessica answered. "Miss Vance would like to meet you." Maya stared at the kitchen light. Scottsdale lived in the kind of brochures and homes with manicured lawns and low-slung, well-lit offices. It lived on a different register from the strip mall heat and the trailer parks. She felt a tug of both hope and caution. She wasn't a child in every sense. She'd been fending for her family, but she was still underage when it came to contracts and signatures. Jessica made the arrangement simple and careful. If anything was to be decided officially, Sarah would sign as guardian until Maya reached adulthood. It was a steadying detail. It preserved the right kind of protection without telling a story more complex than the truth. When the car came, polished, quiet, air-conditioned like a cool breath, Maya felt her palms sweat in a different way. The drive to Scottsdale felt like a film where the camera tilted as she moved between neighborhoods, from the flaking paint of the south side to the precise hedges and glass-fronted offices in the north. The building that housed the Vance office looked like it had been designed to catch light. Its glass reflected the desert sky. Inside, the receptionist offered her a seat with a tray of water. The decor smelled faintly like lemon and linen. Maya kept her hands folded on her knees. She had learned to present herself solidly, to let skill stand for the rest. Eleanor Vance came into the room like someone who had practiced being gracious for many years. She was older than the woman in the Cadillac, taller, with a stillness that suggested both command and kindness. She took off her gloves slowly as if handing over an idea. The moment they met, there was something akin to recognition. Maya felt it like a current, someone deciding to trust what other people had overlooked. Eleanor did not work in flashy ways. She had set up a private habit of testing character. The Cadillac, it turned out, was a deliberate riddle. She would drive and find places where the help gathered their wits in the heat and the noise. And then she watched. She chose carefully, like someone who invested in people rather than in chance. She told Maya she'd seen how the girl had fixed the car with no desire for fanfare, how she'd refused the money and given the woman a smile. "Integrity," Eleanor said, "is not always loud. Often it's quiet, but it's unmissable when you know what to look for." Then came the offer and the shock. Eleanor wanted to ensure Maya's mother had secure healthcare access, and wanted to give Maya a chance to run a business, with working capital, with the promise of a real shop and a name. She wanted to hand over the keys to a place that would carry Marcus's kind of dignity, and extend it to other people who needed a starting place. It would have been easy for the scene to turn like a fairy tale. Money appears, bank accounts swell, but the gift was practical and principled. Eleanor wanted to keep it above board. She made clear the legal detail everyone in the room respected. Because Maya was still a minor, Sarah would sign as guardian for the purpose of transferring the business until Maya reached the legal age to sign on her own. Eleanor arranged for premium health insurance for Sarah, access to care that would help with recurring treatment and provide a safety net, but she did not promise miraculous cures. She promised stability and dignity. When the words landed, Maya felt the earth drop away. She sat like someone who had been told their breath could be taken again. Tears came, fast, honest, disbelieving. Marcus's voice echoed in her mind as if offering applause. She thought of the timing belt she'd taken home that day, the gloves she'd folded and kept in a drawer like relics. She thought of Sarah tucked beneath a blanket, the dialysis machine like one of the steady rhythms of their life. The relief was physical. It was the kind of thing that makes your knees go soft, and the rest of the world rearrange itself into a new possibility. But Eleanor's gift came with expectation, not entitlement. She wanted the business to run not like a charity, but like a place that sold safety and truth, where mechanics were paid well for honest work, and where people were restored to dignity through reliable employment. "You'll run it with the values you were brought up on," Eleanor said. "We'll help you learn. I don't want to buy you a dream and leave you holding it like something fragile. We want to put you in a position to steward it." She laid out clerks and mentors who would teach bookkeeping, customer service, and importantly, how to run a shop with standards that would not be compromised by shortcuts. Maya found herself walking into a small office a week later with a name painted across its windows: Jackson Auto Care and Performance Excellence and Heart. The name felt like hot iron and slow-cured paint, something you couldn't peel off with a moment's impatience. She hung the old gloves on a peg near the tool wall, next to a timing belt Marcus had used to show her how to time an engine. The belt was frayed a little at the edge, proof of use and proof of love. Eleanor, though rich and precise, was careful to keep Marcus's memory present rather than replace it with her own brand. She had insisted on the name, Jackson, because she could see where the traffic in the neighborhood might shift and where people would come to trust a shop that didn't just fix cars, but fixed chances. The first hires at Jackson Auto Care were people others had dismissed. There was Omar, who had served time and needed a place to relearn how to talk about his days without the prison label overshadowing every sentence. There was Lila, a young mother who had learned to weld at a community college and had been turned down by other businesses for reasons that had nothing to do with skill. There was Dusty, an older mechanic whose hands still knew the language of carburetors and which customers to coax into honesty. Maya trained them the way her father had trained her, not with empty platitudes but by getting beneath the hood, by watching the way they breathed around problems, by setting standards that made crooked shortcuts impossible. "You answer the truth," she told the crew on a dusty bench after a long day. "And you don't charge for what you don't do. We sell safety. We sell being honest with your neighbor." Her voice carried Marcus's cadence. The crew listened because they had seen many bosses who either spoke like that and didn't mean it, or never said it at all. Maya meant it. She had learned that integrity was not just a bar to be met, but a way to run a business so people felt the difference when they walked through the door. The transformation was slow and textured. Customers came with cars that rattled like accusations. They left with batteries that hummed contentedly, with receipts that read true things, and with mechanics who treated them as people rather than dollar signs. Word spread, not by flashy ads but by neighbors telling neighbors around barbecued Saturday afternoons and on church parking lot benches. People liked the way the shop took time. They liked the way the jobs were priced fairly. Families came. Teenagers learned. A few of the employees who had feared being defined by past mistakes found themselves building new records and new references. The shop employed people who had little else to claim as starting points, and it gave them a wage that steadied lives like a fence. As business grew, Sarah's health stabilized into a new rhythm. The premium health insurance made appointments less frantic, the medications more reliable, and the worry that sharpens the edges of life softened. It did not promise cures. It promised access and comfort. That difference became a lesson Maya taught her crew. The shop could not be a magic place, but it could be a place where people were kept from sliding, a place that offered dignity as a steady hand. On a late summer morning, Mr. Henderson came back. He did not walk into the shop with the same puffed-up arrogance. The man who pushed open the door had hollowed shoulders and a face that had been browned not by confidence, but by the kind of weather that makes you realize you have nothing to wrap around you. He asked for work the way someone asks for mercy. Tentative, ashamed. People in the waiting room felt a tremor of satisfaction, and then immediately profaned it by wishing for the wrong thing. It would have been easy to gloat or to mock. Maya remembered Marcus. She remembered the timing belt. The options sat in the room like coins. Revenge, cruelty, the small ecstasies of watching a bully suffer. Instead, she chose something quieter and harder. She listened. Her voice was calm and held a firmness that belonged to someone who had been through grief and come out with a new set of priorities. "We won't employ you on the spot," she said, "but if you want to work for us, we do background checks and training. We do assessments. We've got standards." It was a way of saying no to immediate vindication and yes to communal restoration. Henderson's face softened, not with gratitude but with something resembling shame. He left, but not as he had arrived. The shop did not hum with triumph. It hummed with the slow business of living. The moral point was not to crush an antagonist, but to reframe justice as something that built rather than simply tore down. Eleanor watched the shop's early months with a particular kind of pride. She came by sometimes in the afternoons, a quiet observer who would shake hands with the crew and laugh in a way that lent seriousness to their work. She set up a small fund for apprenticeship programs and insisted on a mentorship model that paired older technicians with young trainees. The shop became a place where mistakes were viewed as lessons, not as labels. There were days when the work felt like a miracle, and days when it felt like the slow strategy of plants making their way through concrete. Maya's mother improved in fits and starts. There were good weeks and cautious ones. Maya learned to celebrate both, the small victories like a day with fewer missed appointments, and the larger ones like the first month where payroll finished without dread. The neighborhood started to rely on Jackson Auto Care like a new kind of anchor. People trusted the receipts as reflections of honest work. At some point, Eleanor's health took a quieter turn. She came into the office one afternoon and sat in Maya's small office like a person sharing a secret. Her hands trembled a little, and the light on the window softened. There was a lifetime in Eleanor's pauses. "You done good," she said, in a voice that wanted to be both admonition and benediction. "You kept the promise you didn't know you were making when you waved off that bill." It was the kind of compliment that felt like a benediction and a map. Eleanor had not set the shop on a throne. She had placed it in a way that would let it do what it always meant to do: provide work, train people, and serve the community. "The shop is yours to steward," she continued, "but you won't carry it alone. I'll be here to teach how to think about the business side. Profit that doesn't devour your people. Expansion that doesn't lose your values." She spoke plainly about the need to balance mercy with careful accounting, to be kind without being naive, to expect the best and to prepare for the worst. Eleanor's final days were neither quiet nor unremarkable. There were visitors who had been helped across decades, people whose lives had bent toward dignity, because someone invested the time and money without spectacle. On an afternoon that smelled of rain, she gathered Maya and Sarah and the crew. She pressed Marcus's timing belt into Maya's hand, a small frayed thing that carried the tang of oil and patience. "Keep the belt," she said. "It will remind you of balance. And keep your gloves. They let you touch the world out of service." When Eleanor died, it was with a house full of people who had been quietly remade. There were resources left to support the apprenticeship fund she had started. She did not promise a world remade in an instant. She had arranged access to care, seed funds, and a community that would carry on the work. Her deathbed was full of stories and gratitude, not triumphalism. The shop kept on. It shifted and grew. Years moved on. Maya turned into a woman who could sign papers without needing a guardian, who smoothed out the lines on invoices, who taught apprentices to listen first to the engine and then to the person behind the wheel. The shop's philosophy became a local norm. "We sell safety and truth," read the sign inside the service counter, not as a slogan but as a daily practice. Teenagers came to learn the trade. Formerly marginal employees became crew leads. The pay was fair, the coffee was strong, and the waiting room had a shelf of books because one of the crew insisted that learning should be visible. People used to ask Maya, the girl who had been fired for refusing a payment she felt she didn't deserve, whether she ever regretted the choice that had led to everything. It was a tempting question. Tidy, clean. She would laugh softly and tell the story of the Cadillac and the elderly woman and the boss's rage. Her answer was never, "I planned it." You never plan to be fired. You don't plan to have a wealthy stranger hand you the keys to a business. You plan what you can, the small decisions about how you treat people, the handiwork you do with pride, the way you answer when someone asks for help. One winter afternoon, a journalist came through and wanted the before and after angle that sells well, an arc that moves from villainy to vindication. Maya refused to make Henderson into a caricature. She told the reporter instead about the moment when Henderson returned, ashamed and asking for help, and about how the shop had an apprenticeship path for people who wanted to rebuild their lives. She described the slow work of reorientation better than any headline could. It was, she said, more satisfying to be the place that offered a hand than the place that scored a point. At a community luncheon, a woman held up a napkin with the shop's name and said, "You changed my son's life." A former ex-con worked the parts counter with a steady smile. Sarah spent her mornings reading in a chair, with the afternoon sun across her knees, clinic appointments now misplaced among good days. The small things made the shop story feel true. A mechanic's handshake, the timing belt displayed on the wall next to a photo of Marcus, Eleanor's note pinned beneath it. Maya kept the gloves in a drawer that opened with the right kind of ease. She still used them when she worked. The physical work of repairing cars never lost its holiness for her, not because it was sanctified, but because it was honest labor. The grease on the gloves became a map of all the days she had chosen to do right, when it would have been easier not to. What happened next after the firing was not overnight redemption or revenge. It was a measured, difficult remaking of choices, one where money, care, and community were stitched together by intention. It was a story of someone seeing a person's quiet courage and deciding it had value beyond a single job ticket. Eleanor's wealth did not transform the world by itself. It transformed a small set of lives because she chose to invest in people who could steward that change. The real shock was not that a wealthy woman chose to invest. The real shock was the way a small act of kindness, Maya refusing a bill because the repair was right to do, set a course that became generational. Years later, people would stop and point to Jackson Auto Care like it was a landmark. The sign would still reflect the sun. The shop would still have the smell of oil and hot metal, and the same tools would be there, evidence of continuity. Beneath the laugh and the bustle, there would be a quiet rule that guided every decision. Fix what needs fixing, and don't take what isn't yours. If there's a single thing to carry from Maya's story, it isn't that good things always happen when you're kind. It's that kindness put into motion with competence and protected by steady stewardship often creates conditions for justice and for people to rebuild. It's that sometimes the hardest, most courageous acts look small at the moment, refusing a bill, refusing to escalate insult with insult, and that those acts can become catalytic when others see them and choose to act in turn. Sometimes people wrote into the shop with stories. A woman from Phoenix sent a letter about how a mechanic at Jackson had saved her from being stranded on a dark highway. A young man sent a photo of his first paycheck from the shop, and his mother had cried when she saw it. People who had once sat in waiting rooms at other shops, shameful and uncertain, would now bring their kids by to teach them what an honest trade looked like. Maya kept the timing belt and the gloves as if they were both sacred objects and ordinary ones. Life is made of such things, objects that remind you of the past and tools for the future. She hung Eleanor's last note on the board behind the counter. Steward what you're given, teach what you know, be kind but be shrewd. On quiet evenings, Maya would sit on a stool in the bay and listen to the shop hum. Sometimes she would remember the way Henderson had shouted the firing, and the shock of it would rise like a bad smell. But then she would remember the Cadillac's return to life, the woman's cane tapping on the pavement, the way Marcus had smiled when she'd finally tightened the last bolt. She would remember the slow golden days of working with her crew, showing a younger mechanic how to read a timing mark, teaching someone how to ask a customer the right questions, and how to tell the truth kindly. The story of a girl who fixed an elderly woman's car for free and was fired is a story about small acts and big consequences. It's about an economy where character counts as capital, about a rich woman who used her resources to restore rather than to shame, and about a community that learned to measure success by the dignity people could earn inside it. It's about keeping a father's teachings alive in calloused hands and passing them on to people who had been told their pasts would be their futures. There was never a moment when Maya thought she deserved everything that had come. She thought instead of how to make the shop repay the kindness it had received. She thought of apprentices' lunches, of health benefits that stayed for employees through lean seasons, of paying overtime and of ensuring people left work with pay slips that read true things. She learned business decisions the hard way, not by letting profit be the only star, but by letting people be the compass. Time folded the story into routines, report cards mailed to parents, apprenticeships completed, a steady client list. Once a young girl came in and watched Maya under the hood with starry eyes. The girl's mother explained that the child wanted to be a mechanic. Maya knelt down beside her in the same way Marcus had once knelt beside her, and she showed the kid how to find the point where the belt met the pulley, how to hear the note that said everything was aligned. It was small, just a hand on metal, but these were the moments that threaded generations together. The final, quiet revelation in the arc was not a single, spectacular event. It was the way a community rearranged itself because someone had chosen to be kind, and someone else had chosen to amplify that kindness responsibly. It was the way an act that seemed like a small social misdemeanor, the refusal of a bill, became a test that proved the existence of a useful currency: integrity. She was fired because she had said, "It was nothing, ma'am." But what happened next was not a headline about revenge. It was about the slow work of building something that could hold people up. It was about a woman in a Cadillac who turned out to be more than she seemed, and who used that surprise to create opportunities, rather than to merely reward one person. It was about a young mechanic who, through grief and stubbornness, kept her father's lessons alive and made them into a place where other people could come and be remade. If this story moved you, if you've ever seen kindness turn a life, or if a small decision ever surprised you with consequences you never expected, share that moment in the comments below. Maybe the city where it happened, a place you'd love to see a shop like this, or a time when someone's kindness changed your course. And if you want to see more stories of unexpected justice and quiet courage, like this video and subscribe for more. In the end, the gloves stayed on the peg. The timing belt stayed on the wall. The shop's bays kept their light on for the early shifts and the late ones. People came and left and came back again, and the work kept proving its worth in small, human increments. Maya's life was not a tidy moral play where everything bent toward a broadcastable miracle. It was a lived, honest thing. It was service and stubbornness, and the slow acceptance of responsibility. It was, above all, a reminder. Kindness, when practiced with skill and protected by stewardship, can be the first turn in a chain that builds communities and restores lives.